current crisis on staff and faculty, we have a full panel of specialists that we welcome today. They are Finnie Coleman, the President of the Faculty Senate and Professor of English, Nicole Tami, the Executive Director of the Global Education Office, Elizabeth Hutchison, Professor of History and Director of the Feminist Research Institute, who's also currently serving as a faculty liaison for the Student Faculty Facilitation Network, Eva Chi, our Student Faculty Facilitation Network liaison, our second one, and also Professor of Chemical Engineering, Ryan Gregg, the Staff Council President, Kiran Katira, the Community Engagement Center Director, and Francie Cordova, OEO Director. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. And so we ask panelists to speak in the order that they were introduced, with the exception of Dr. Coleman, who will go last. Given our short hour for today's webinar, we ask each panelist to keep their responses to 5 minutes or less. And so we will move on and invite Nicole Tami to answer this question. Many international students have returned home due to the COVID-19 crisis and are having to complete their semester virtually. What additional support do they require from faculty and/or staff at this time? And also, what is one thing that you believe international students would want their instructors to consider and remember?
Thank you, Dr. Zerai. So there's a couple of questions there embedded in that larger question, and I'll try to address them all. I think in terms of considering what UNM faculty and instructors may need to be aware of as they are planning for additional online coursework is, of course, the fact that if our international students have returned home and are logging on from various time zones, that there's some limitations and challenges to doing any kind of class that may be synchronous. So we are definitely encouraging faculty to think about asynchronous course options as preferable options if they're dealing with an international student who may be taking their class. It's very difficult to be focused if you're taking a class at 3 o'clock in the morning local time. Students are also dealing with varying levels of technology and bandwidth, so creating content and assignments that don't require continuous internet access or even high-speed internet access. Loading large files or having to use special software is tough when you're doing that from a country who may have very different infrastructure. And so those are things to keep in mind. It's important to note that not all students have chosen to go home or have even been able to go home. There are countries who are on lockdown. India most recently has continued and extended its lockdown even for its own citizens. So citizens are not able to return home. The same for Ecuador. There's also more extreme cases. For example, Hungary has instituted emergency law. So there's very different things happening around the globe that impact the citizens of that country, not just those that are in the country itself, but those that are studying abroad in the US and, perhaps other countries such as, the UK or Australia, and are dealing with being separated from family members during this very unpredictable time. I think there's tremendous pressure on our international students in terms of their financial future. Many of them are very worried about being able to retain campus employment, particularly TA-ships and RA-ships into the fall. We've had a number of students who are on optional practical training, also known as OPT this summer, who've been laid off or whose hours have been reduced or the opportunities have been canceled. And that has major visa implications and financial implications for these students. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, is that right now, financial constraints for international students are very real, and the opportunities they have are even more limited than those that our domestic students often have, in part because they don't always qualify for the same incentive programs. Many of them, or most, don't qualify for unemployment because they were either working part-time or haven't been working consecutively for 12 months. Depending on their visa type, there's sometimes even restrictions that prevent them from taking advantage of social support services. And so there definitely, I think, is a lot of stress and anxiety currently among international students, which I know mirrors some of the stress that our domestic students are having as well. But just to reiterate that their options sometimes for financial alternatives are more limited, and many of them were relying on support from their families back home, which now may have been compromised because of, you know, family members having been laid off or having been furloughed or what have you. So I guess I'll end with saying, you know, that there's also been some additional sort of frustration and anxiety in terms of dealing with increased scrutiny and racialization for international students, which can be very stressful. I would say that this is particularly true for students of Asian descent or those who are racialized as Asian. There's been a lot of reiteration currently, you know, in the mainstream media about conspiracy theories and, you know, the origin of this virus in China. And so I think that many of our Chinese students are feeling like they're under a very uncomfortable spotlight. And I think that's important to remember too. And the same, you know, can be said for our instructors and faculty who may be of Chinese or Asian descent. And so I think in total, those are a lot of different stressors that are impacting students' ability to be focused, to work productively. And I think if our faculty and staff are aware of those pressures, they'll be better equipped to support the students, to have the needed empathy for the students, and perhaps to think creatively about how to support these students.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We really appreciate that. And thanks to all of you who have joined us. We almost have 300 participants, and so that's pretty exciting for all of us. So next, I'd like to pose a question to Dr. Liz Hutchison. And she is a part of the Student Faculty Facilitation Network, which has been created to facilitate communication between faculty and their students to address barriers that they may face during this time of transition. And could you tell us a little bit about what prompted the creation of the network, as well as about your role in it?
Thank you, Dr. Zerai. I'm happy to, and I'm happy to be participating in this webinar. The idea for some additional form of or opportunity through which students could try to resolve issues coming up for them in the transition to the online environment came up through conversations among members of the Feminist Research Institute and the Women's Resource Center and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies faculty, who began to hear stories from students around mid to late March, expressing a lot of anxiety about the conditions under which they would be moving online. And in a context where on the faculty side, it seemed we were focusing a lot on making that movement online possible, we asked the administration to look closely and be extra attentive to some of the unintended consequences of moving quickly to a remote format. This conversation was also pushed along by two separate developments that were occurring at the same time. One was the Diversity Council's letter on COVID-19, which among many other things pointed to the potential barriers to student success that result from unequal access to electronics, to internet, unfamiliarity with platforms, and so forth. And then right around the same time, the March 24th Faculty Senate resolution that Dr. Coleman will address later, which urged faculty in response to this situation to not only ask the Senate to endorse the no credit option for the remainder of the semester, but also urge faculty to be flexible and humane in their response to students' needs as they were expressed to faculty. This put us in a situation in which a small group of us, including Dr. Zerai, Dr. Pamela Cheek from the Provost's office, as well as Tim Gutierrez of Student Affairs, worked with a handful of faculty, including Eva Chi and myself, to create a mechanism for rapid response to students experiencing difficulty with this transition to remote learning. So what we put in place was 2 faculty liaisons who could be activated essentially to make sure that student-faculty communication proceeds in a quick way that can address those barriers before they become issues that might endanger the success in this semester of students facing, like the faculty facing the challenges of the COVID-19 environment. In that work, I would just say that I'm privileged to serve as a liaison because it gives me an opportunity to, in hearing these stories about student concerns, to move quickly in consultation with associate deans and other associate deans and student affairs personnel, as well as other members of the campus community, to make sure that we intervene in those conversations and support both students and faculty in resolving them as quickly as we can. So that's essentially the role that I'm playing with the team, and it is making us probably stronger in helping communication across these units in ways that we hope over the long term, whatever we're dealing with in months ahead, we'll be better prepared to think ahead with and for students about the conditions that support their learning and their success.
Thank you so much. That was a great explanation. And now we'd like to introduce our other network liaison. Her name is Dr. Chi. And as the other liaison, would you please tell us more about the types of cases currently being reported and how they're being addressed, and as well as how instructors and other campus allies and intermediaries are responding to this new service?
Thank you. We have had a number of cases that Liz and I have both been addressing. One of the, I guess 2, and we've been getting these feedback both through the network as well as through, I want to say, various student advocate organizations. They kind of either filter up to us, or even from my everyday interaction with my own students, we're kind of getting a fuller picture of the challenges that our students are facing, particularly, I think in my case, in engineering, in STEM discipline. So 2 students who actually happen to be students in my department have talked to their mentors and gave us the feedback that they're working hard and they're really trying to keep up. And group work, which we like to do in many of our engineering classes, have gotten much harder. Even though they have various ways to meet online, it's just more difficult. And also, a lot of professors have really gone full steam, transitioned, including myself, transitioned their classes online. And we're trying to teach as much as possible. We're trying to make sure the students are learning as much as possible. And as a result, this kind of hardcore approach really puts a lot of stress on the students, given the situations that they're in. For example, they can't log on to class synchronously when they have little kids at home, when their spouse is an essential worker. So they're, we're doing daycare, we're doing homeschooling. And then, so a lot of those stresses. So I've responded to both students and, hearing that feedback, I made changes to my classes, which hopefully have reduced barrier to my students. And I've just asked very broadly every time I see them, you know, what's going on with your classes and what are some barriers to your success? And we felt as the network that, you know, even though we're addressing concerns from these two specific students, this is kind of the broader sentiment from a lot of our students. So to that end, you know, we've drafted some letters to send to faculty to outreach more broadly, since this tends to be, you know, kind of a common scenario. And then try to reach out to different department chairs to more broadly, you know, disseminate, you know, just kind of bring to them the student voices that we have been hearing. I think from the faculty side, all of us have tried really hard. You know, many of us who've never taught online classes before, you know, to kind of, you know, get to the online format. And along the way, we don't really know, you know, some of the intricacies of online learning. So I think as a result, you know, there's a lot of these stresses that we didn't even know that we were putting on the students. So I think, you know, just in general, I think, you know, what the students are saying directly to us is very powerful. And, you know, just remind the faculty to exercise flexibility and compassion. You know, I've told students, ask for extensions of deadlines. And, you know, both to advocate for themselves, as well as, you know, telling the faculty that, you know, be flexible. Think about alternative ways to do your assignments. Think about alternative ways to do assessment. That, you know, the tool that we have as a clutch is, you know, give exams, give closed book, closed notes exams. And we're so worried about, you know, what if, you know, they cheat? It's really, you know, what I see from the students is that they are trying really hard, working really hard. So just kind of approach this with flexibility and compassion as a mindset, and keep the conversation going with our students. Know how the students are doing. So that's kind of where those two specific concerns have led to what I've been doing more recently. And hopefully, I've talked to a few faculty in my department, and it's really nice to just have a conversation with them as well. So hopefully this will lead to some broader changes. We still have 3 weeks left. And that's not a lot of time, but it's enough time to make some changes.
Thank you so much, Eva. I totally agree. Flexibility and compassion, that's the right combination. And one of the things I love about being here at UNM is that by and large, that is what our faculty are about. And so, yeah, it's just a privilege to be working with people who care so much about our students. Before we move on to staff concerns, I would like to go ahead and invite President Finnie Coleman, who's the president of the Faculty Senate, to answer a couple of questions. So we've talked about the ways that faculty are supporting students, but I'd like to turn our attention for a few moments on the stress that our own faculty members are facing. And so, Dr. Coleman, how do you feel faculty members have handled the stress and loss they're experiencing during COVID-19? And how has the crisis disrupted their professional lives?
So that's an interesting, very nested question. You know, some of my analysis is based on what I'm not hearing as opposed to what I have heard. And so I don't think that I've heard as much complaint as I thought that I would about the process and having to go online. It would suggest to me that people, our faculty are professionals and just said, this is what we have to do. It was good to have a little bit more time over the break for faculty to make the transition. There were some concerns about the quality of instruction. I'm in conversations with people. We kind of developed two networks just as this pandemic started to impact us. And one was a coalition of faculty governance leaders around the Mountain West Conference. It's something that we've been working on for a while and just got that stood up. And then I also took the same structure and we did it with for faculty governance leaders around the state. And so was able to talk with governance leaders around our conference and in the state about this. And in what our colleagues at CNM and other places are pointing out is that, you know, there is, it seems, an institutional bias against the notion of online or distance learning. And that's manifest in the fact that even in our own policies, we resist using the term online teaching and the like, that, you know, we don't want to use those terms because there are many of us in our community who feel that instruction is somehow less than. I teach courses online, at least one course a year, but I'm kind of a nerdy geek like that. I like to try to bring new technologies into my pedagogy. So for some faculty who are, you know, have done, you know, online classes before, I don't think that this was a very difficult transition. But for others, it has been tough, and I know some of our colleagues are still struggling. You know, I think there is a good chance that this is something that we're going to have to deal with in the fall semester, certainly through the summer. And you know, the question about what we've kind of learned, the lessons learned about this, is we probably should have thought about this in our COOP before now, that, you know, our plan for continuous operations, you know, what would happen if we had a situation like this. We just had not thought through that. I think as a faculty, what would we do if we were forced for whatever reasons not to be able to deliver in-person instruction? It's horrible that we're having the conversation in this particular environment, but I'm really proud of the way that we're adapting to that and making good progress with our students. I think that answers the specific question maybe that you asked, but I'm sure you have something else for me.
Yeah, I think just really to get a sense of the kind of stresses that our faculty are under, the sense of loss that they have, that they're not able to connect with our students one-on-one, and many of them have had, you know, stalled research progress, and, you know, what the university can do to be supportive. That was pretty much what I wanted you to talk about. Did you have anything else to offer? You're on mute.
In the initial prompt, I think there were some questions about the COVID-19 emergency measures for student academic success, where that came about, and I'm happy to say something about that if you'd like.
That's fine. We started talking about it a little bit in your absence, but sure,
Okay.
if there's more you'd like to offer, we're happy to hear it.
Well, I think it was a very interesting. It's hard to talk about this sometimes without sounding as if you're casting aspersions. But this came about. The provost approached me with some things that he was thinking about asking the faculty to do. And I knew that faculty were already thinking about things that we wanted to do. And so I asked him and Dr. Cheek to give me a chance to go back to our faculty, and we'll work through a slate of things to get done. We took the list of things that they wanted, And then we, rewrote that from the faculty's perspective. It was a really, I don't remember when it has been that easy to work with the administration on something that was as weighty as that, and to have full buy-in from the very beginning and trust that the faculty senate was going to produce something that our students were going to benefit from. So that was a nod, I think, towards President Stokes and the Provost Holloway's confidence in the faculty senate, and rather than issue an edict about what we were going to do, it was much better to collaborate with faculty to come up with a set of things that we all felt we needed and wanted to do. So that was how that came about. And I think what we produced for some folk doesn't go far enough, and for other folk it's way too much. It's an overreach. I think it's just right. I think it's in the middle, and so that's where it came from. That's how it came up. How it came about.
Thank you so much. That's really enlightening to hear how administration and faculty came together to create something really useful. I appreciate that. So we're going to move on and talk about some staff concerns. And we invite Ryan Gregg, the Staff Council President, to respond to the following question. COVID-19 has impacted not only students, but also faculty staff. What are some of the biggest challenges that staff have faced thus far, in your opinion? And also, do you feel staff have received adequate support to work in remote environments?
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here and to be talking with all of you, because I think it's so important for us to continue to engage, even though we're all far apart. We're all creatures who enjoy interaction. And so I was really pleased to have been invited, and I'm happy to talk with all of you. It looks like we have almost 300 people again, so it's great. I'm glad we're doing this. I think there's no doubt about it that COVID-19 has definitely impacted staff in a number of ways. We have to address the new environment that we find ourselves in, and we have to retool for how we get through this, because we will get through it. We've just got to figure out how we do it. So first, I want to acknowledge that there are these three different tiers, and there are faculty and staff and even student employees in those three different tiers. And so I just want to make sure that we're communicating to you, and I know this from the administration's perspective, but also through mine, that we're so thankful for each of the employees who are fulfilling their roles, even if they're in tier 3 and they're just on-call status and ready to come back. It's so important that we all understand that every one of those tiers makes a difference. We're continuing critical work. We're also paying attention to the social distancing. This is going to get us through this. So I think that's important to acknowledge first. I also want to acknowledge that many staff have been put in the position of being on the front lines of hearing the emotional fallout from our students and from our faculty colleagues. Staff support both students and faculty, and so we're hearing that frustration all the time, and not many of us, some of us are mental health experts, but many more of us are not. And so I really want to acknowledge the extra work that have been placed onto the shoulders of staff, because it's important to recognize that. I can't help take some of that work away, but we can at least acknowledge it so that we all know it's happening and it's appreciated. I also want to say that staff are concerned about their families and friends, just like everybody else is. That's primary on the top of everyone's minds. That's what I'm hearing from people. There is real fear about what we're going through, and I think we all understand that. But again, I think acknowledging it helps us get through this shared experience. To know that we're all fearful helps us a little bit. So I think that's important. Staff are concerned about their jobs. They're concerned about jobs during this limited staffing operation. They're also concerned about their jobs as we move into the fall. What does it mean if we don't have the enrollment that we think we need? What does it mean if the state adjusts our budget? What does it mean if we are impacted largely by the pandemic? All those things make a big difference. People are also concerned about their planned salary increases. We've all heard, and we worked very hard. I know a lot of staff and faculty worked very hard to help the legislature see how important that was. And people are now concerned. If we have budget changes, what does that mean for those salary increases? So I just want to make sure, this is what I'm telling all staff when I talk to them, so I think this is a great way to mention it. There are 4 factors that are going to really impact how we move through this. 1, how long does this last? You know, that's going to be a big deal for us. How long does the pandemic last? 2, what's the economic impact? What do we see the economy do as a result of how long it lasts? 3, we've really got to see what the state does and what the federal government does to help us stabilize that. And then the 4th thing really is our enrollment. What does our enrollment do? So as you can imagine, as some of those things are better or worse, that makes our outlook a little better or worse. So I know that doesn't give people a lot to say, oh, we all know what we're going to do and how it's going to shake out. But I do think that it's helpful to have some things to track. So if we say, oh, this didn't go on as long as we thought it did, or, oh, the economy didn't seem to have as big of a hiccup, or it looks like the state and federal government are going to do a lot. And I'm happy to share, many of you know that my daytime staff role that isn't staff council focused is in admissions. We're hearing from many students that they anticipate this to end and they'll show up for the college experience they've been hoping for. So we're really, really hopeful that we'll get back to a sense of business as usual. Of course, everything post-COVID will look a little different, but we're really hopeful that we'll see those people because they're just as excited. You know, that some students are really disappointed they're missing out on things like prom and their commencement, but many more of them are saying, it's okay, I'm ready to move forward and I'm ready for my college experience. So we want to make sure that we're there for that, and admissions is doing online virtual information sessions, virtual tours of campus. So we're not stopping, and we're ready to greet those students when they get here. To the question about staff resources, I think that by and large, staff do have the resources that they need in order to do their jobs. I'll use my department as one example. We took that first several weeks of limited staffing operations, and many people were in tier 3, several were in tier 2, those people who were ready and could work immediately from home, and then some were in tier 1 status. But as the time went on, we developed additional protocols to check out your desktop computer instead of giving you a laptop, or to try to find a way to do mail merges and letters from home. So many departments took that period and then whittled down the number of tier 3 folks and got them to tier 2, and then also whittled down the number of tier 1 folks to get them to tier 2. So I think mostly departments have tried to support people as they can, but the administration is also supporting people. So many people, I hope, know about the potential for a partial reimbursement. The university has created a policy that allows staff who may have incurred some additional cost or maybe using their personal resources in order to do their work from home to potentially get a partial reimbursement in the same way that some folks get their cell phones partially reimbursed. So what I want to say to staff and to faculty is that if you have incurred additional cost, or if it's become more difficult for you to do your job trying to work from home, reach out to your supervisor and talk to them about whether that reimbursement is right for you, because that's one of the ways the university is supporting all of us. And I think that's a good takeaway in general. If you need something to do your job and you don't feel like you've got it, the best place to start is with your supervisor. Tell them what you might need, see what's reasonable. We've heard some interesting stories. I know for us, when we checked out those desktops, everybody said, here's the big problem. How are we going to get them all connected? You know, we have IT come and connect our machines all the time. How are we going to get them connected? So I want to give a shout out to our staff in enrollment management IT. They came up with a great idea to just take a picture of the back of your computer at work. And then when you got home, look at that picture as you plugged everything back in. And would you believe not a single person had an IT tech challenge working from home? So I think we're really adapting. Our staff are adaptable. I think UNM's people are adaptable. We're used to working with less stuff than maybe would be ideal. And so I think we're doing this well. We're moving into it and we're going to be okay. The other thing that I really want to mention is what I've really been advocating for, so that people understand what we're doing, and I'm happy to hear feedback about that. So one of the things that I'm really advocating for is a flexible return to work plan. I've heard from a lot of staff, and I'm sure faculty are involved in this same way, that they're now pseudo caretakers or pseudo educators. And for them to find out on a Friday that they need to come back to work on a Monday would create significant challenges for them. So I'm advocating for as much time between when we're notified we need to come back and when we actually come back as possible, so that it can give people the time to make other arrangements, get the things that they're now taking care of back to someone else to help take care of. So those are the things we're trying to work for. I've been working with your office, Dr. Zerai, and also with the president to try and get a staff survey out there to identify whether there are gaps in technology or other things. And I think that's extremely important. I'm also asking for more clarity for managers and supervisors about some of those policies, like the reimbursement, to make sure that when staff go to their supervisors, they have good answers back to them. Regular communication is important. And I also think that we're supporting the effort to translate all of the important information about COVID into Spanish for our Spanish-speaking staff and faculty. So those are all really important things. Some staff council stuff, we're resuming our regular business meetings via Zoom this month, so that'll be good. And I'm continuing to engage with administration in regular meetings. I do them all here in our third bedroom that I've converted into an office. So it works out well. And then we're also going to get back to planning the staff council elections as soon as we can, so that we have our representation moving forward. That had to be placed a little bit on hold, but we're going to be discussing that. So in closing, I'd just like to invite individual staff to reach out. Please reach out to your supervisors if you have questions about your work. Reach out to me if you have other questions about our advocacy efforts or anything else that you might want to. And then just hang in there and take care of yourselves. It's important for us to, you might have seen my cat behind me, play with your dog or your cat, try to go outside. It's very nice now. And just take care of yourselves.
Thank you so much for that uplifting message. I have definitely heard about the staff needs assessment survey, and I know it's being edited now. It's something that actually the staff council DEI committee discussed with us a couple weeks ago, and so I'm really happy to know that that's moving along. And then the other thing that I'll mention is Dr. Roth from HSC is making the suggestion that we do for a staggered return to work plan. And so that's something I'm sure we'll be hearing more about soon. All right, so next we would like to invite the Director of the Center for Community Engagement, Dr. Kiran Katira, to tell us a little bit about what's happening in her part of the world. And so here is your specific question. You interact regularly with the local community. How has the coronavirus epidemic impacted Asian and Pacific Islander communities in New Mexico? What are some tools that we can use in order to address the stress and anxiety many are feeling? And we'll need you to unmute.
For the community insights and what people are saying out there. So one of the things I do want to say is that I'm part of the New Mexico Asian Family Center, and I'm also part of the NACA Inspired Schools Network. And so some of the insights that I'm going to bring to you are really from some of those community partners and strong allies that we've had for a long time. And I think everyone on the call and in the nation is seeing the backlash towards the Chinese population in particular. But it's really anyone that even looks Chinese. So there's a story after story, and some of it has hit some of our local news as well, right? Whether it's horrible racist pranks, or whether it's the New Mexico Asian Family Center's ex-ED getting shouted at, like, go back to your country, those kinds of things. So we're seeing really sort of awful impact in the Asian community of the virus. And it doesn't help that, you know, public officials are saying things that are putting the attention on the Chinese people rather than on the virus. So the piece that's happening in community is that a lot of community members are now, they're first generation, right? And they're getting a sense of how the US population sees them. And it's really jarring for them, right? So they didn't have this idea that, you know, real sort of discrimination was so prevalent, and it hit them hard, you know? They were thinking that, you know, this is a place that was accepting of them. And we work with REM, it's an even bigger shock, right? they're coming from so much trauma, and then they end up coming here and getting this kind of backlash. So it's a big reality check. And I think some of it sort of really boils down to things that come out in our society every time we're in. I call myself a long distance runner because I think about not just now, but why is this happening based on history, and what can be done moving forward based on that historical context. So if you look at a statement like go back where you came from, right, which is what was shouted at to the New Mexico Asian Family Center ED, that comes from a long-standing notion that the Asian population and the Chinese are seen as forever foreigner. So what are we doing at this university to really address the fact that we have a strong history of Asians, not only all across the US, but in this state? What are we doing to really address that notion of they are Americans too, right? And not sticks. And then when we hear the focus on the Chinese rather than on the virus, it takes us to the history of something that keeps rearing its head in US history, and that's the notion of yellow peril, right? And so the whole sort of criminalizing of a whole group of people that keeps coming up, and that is happening right now. There is so much out there that the community is having to face in terms of as if this was done on purpose, or if this is part of some conspiracy, or, you know, and all of that is that reality check of how we haven't addressed yellow peril, right? We haven't addressed some of that long-standing backlash towards the Asian population. And I think one of the things we can do at the university is learn that history will rear its head and things will come up unless we intention when we're in trauma, but along the way, right? So why is it now that we'll start having, you know, forums and things in community? So this is happening right now. We're having a lot of forums and educational spaces and trying to re-educate people. And it just brought to mind how, you know, part of what we could be doing is having that conversation all along, all through the year, and really addressing one of the things that even pops up at the university. We know that this state is not 3 cultures only, and yet the tricultural myth is something that's promoted on our campus by various faculty and staff on any, you know, given day in different classes and spaces. So we should have a real sort of unified notion of that's a myth, right? And we really need more, but in the immediate moment, we can speak to all of these things, right? And we can also, and I loved what was said earlier, it's the whole notion of treat people with kindness and compassion. This is the moment where it's needed more than ever. So I would say those are some of the things that the community members been asking for and what the community's been saying. And so you're going to hear a little bit more about some of the perspectives in upcoming forums. And I would love for faculty, staff, students they are holding based on their reality. So those are just some of the things, and hope that was useful.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry the connection wasn't perfect. So we'll definitely make sure that we make the transcript available to everyone, because we definitely want to soak in all the good words and thoughts from Dr. Katira. So last but not least, Francie Cordova, the OEO director, will answer this question. So this coronavirus outbreak has led to increases in xenophobia, racism, and discriminatory behaviors. What should staff or faculty do if they experience this type of behavior on campus? Given that cases are ongoing and intimate partner violence has reportedly increased under stay-at-home orders, How have OEO and advocates moved Title IX responses online?
Thank you, Dr. Zerai, and I think it's a good segue from Dr. Katira's statements about what's happening in the community. I think we know that in the last 4 years, xenophobia and discrimination have increased, probably because of the national conversation and the polarization of our country. And most of it, and many or much of it, happens anonymously and through cyber trolling and cyberbullying, and of course, yelled out comments, that sort of thing. And I think education is key, but I also think that it's important to really have an uptick in our bystander intervention, whatever people feel comfortable with, to create some sort of diversion when these kind of things are happening, to support somebody who's being yelled at or cyberbullied, to document things, screenshotting things and reporting it. We have a hate bias report form that is both at UNMPD and OYO. You can report it on either website and it'll automatically report to the other agency. And then it'll be reviewed for a hate bias crime or looked at for either tracking purposes or civil rights discrimination. And I think all of those are good practices right now in this climate to really support each other and to intervene when we see those kind of behaviors when we can, whether it's online or in person. I think those are very important. Similarly with IPV, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, I think this is something we expected in a time like this. New Mexico has a very high rate of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, and the kind of factors that are occurring now in COVID, social isolation, food and work insecurity are all contributors to those kind of things. So we knew there would be an uptick, and there was an uptick with faculty, staff, and students at UNM anyway, even before the COVID. I think one of the things that's a little scary right now is, although we know there's increases in domestic violence, there's not increases in people going to shelters or seeking help. And I think we know the reason why. It's a scary time, so people don't want to leave their homes when there's some thought that they might be infected if they go to a place for resources. And of course, they're afraid of their abuser. They're home alone, potentially with the abuser or with children. We know if there's other factors, people are there's alcohol and insecurity, money insecurities, that then there's more chance that they'll get hurt. So we want people to know that, first of all, the domestic violence shelters are still accepting people. We want them to know that our confidential advocacy centers on campus, the LGBTQ Resource Center, the Women's Resource Center, and Lobo Respect are all still talking to people and supporting them and counseling them and giving them resources. There are several community resources. There is an app, New Mexico Connect, that people can have on their phone where they can connect with counselors 24 hours a day. And if you indicate that you're a UNM affiliated person, then you get sent to a UNM resource as well. I think all that's really important because it's important to plan if you're experiencing domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Even if you can't leave at that moment, what do you think about when you can? Is there a way to create a safety plan? Do you know where your documents are? All of those things are important to talk through with somebody, and maybe in a day you might be able to think through, if my abuser is going out for groceries once a week, is that the time that I can connect to a resource? If they're going outside at a specific time, can I look at those resources? So all of that is still up and functioning, even if virtually. Our office, the Office of Equal Opportunity, is still talking to people virtually. All investigations are still proceeding. We're interviewing people online and over Skype. It's not ideal, especially in these sort of traumatic experiences, but it's still going forward, and we'll still be investigating these cases. So all of the resources are on our website. We have an expanded resource list for all community and UNM resources, and also in other counties in New Mexico, where we know that resources are even more limited. So we hope that people will be familiar with them and then provide them to staff or faculty or students that are experiencing anything related to discrimination or domestic violence or any of the other things that we cover. We will send resources out to anyone who contacts our office or any report that's made to our office, and ensure that someone has someone to talk to. We really see mental health being an issue right now. We've got a lot of calls from people who are really, they're already having anxiety in their regular student life or faculty or staff life, and then this pandemic is just pushing them over the top. We've been able to connect them with resources, and we'll do that, and we're happy to talk to anyone if they call our office. We'll get the phones, we'll be back to them probably that in the next hour, but for sure within the day.
Thank you so much, Francie. You all are doing such great work over at the Office of Equal Opportunity. We really appreciate you sharing that, and even in terms of helping folks to think about strategies to make sure they stay safe. And so for the last question, this came from actually Dr. Hutchison. And she says, to speak to positive aspects of the university community's response to COVID-19, I'm sure you all have gotten a sense in this webinar and the last one that a lot of resources have been brought to bear to address the difficulties that we're facing. She says that the outpouring of services and support for students as well as faculty have been tremendous. Community is an important source of hope and healing as we go through this. And so who would like to talk more about that? You can just unmute yourself and start talking.
Well, I'll just answer my own question. I just felt like it was important to let our listeners know that we're doing our best to push out the information about the additional services and the initiatives and so forth. And I think we don't want to see that just be some function of crisis. I've heard over and over again in meetings of the network and elsewhere that as we experience social isolation and a disruption in our normal work lives, that the opportunity to work collectively and solve problems, particularly putting students first, has been really a source of strength and support for us as members of the university community. So I just thought it was important that we mention that. It's a privilege to work in these capacities, and we want to do more if we can.
If I can just add, I have similarly seen very proactive collaboration among staff and faculty and different units around campus. And I think I've seen a great outpouring of creativity and flexibility among staff and faculty and student employees that we work with as well. Most people have been incredibly adaptive and have been very quick to offer help, solutions, alternative options, and moved very quickly. Ryan gave the example of his IT people. We certainly relied on our IT team as well within the Global Education Office that varied from staff to student professionals who were helping to update laptops, issue laptops, provide guidance on how to access student data securely and that kind of thing. And so I think it's everybody has been incredibly versatile, and it's important to point that out in a time when it can feel very isolating and it can seem like the effort is not being seen. I also know that many of us were working overtime. The work from home was not necessarily a break, but it also was an increase in needing to support and triage students and visiting scholars and other folks that our respective offices and departments serve. And they needed answers quickly. And there was a lot of folks who were very nervous and insecure about what was happening. And that led to an increase of inquiries and a need for answers. And I feel like the campus was very prudent in terms of how it addressed those questions, while at the same time not being reactionary. And so it's been a pleasure to work as part of a community of, staff and faculty, not just within my own unit, but within the larger campus. So I've appreciated being a part of that.
Thank you so much. Did anyone else want to offer something before we close?
I just wanted to say that I am hearing from a lot of staff that they're just very fortunate to be able to continue working. Many of our friends and neighbors, family members, we've all seen the unemployment numbers are out of jobs. And so I think it's important to note that we work for a kind, caring, big-hearted organization organization that wanted to make sure that we kept people at the center of our decision making. And I'm hopeful that that we will continue to do that. And as we approach the legislature and face any impending budget changes, I've heard from the president directly that we're going to face them people-centered as well. So I'm so grateful for that opportunity to work at a university where we do care about people, our students, our faculty, our staff, and our community partners.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Okay, so just double checking that anyone else has their hand up. So thanks to all of you for hanging out with us this afternoon. And thanks to our panelists. So unfortunately, if we all clap, you won't hear us, but virtual clapping, yes. I really appreciate your responses and the sharing of resources. We did get a few questions about the New Mexico Connect app. If you just put Google New Mexico Connect, but you have to spell app A-P-P because I spelled it wrong the first time, then you'll be able to find the link. So to all of you at home, please join us for the third installation of our climate and COVID-19 webinars. This one will focus on Asian and Pacific Islander student challenges, and it will take place on Friday, May 1st at 1 p.m. So again, thank you for your time today. Again, thanks to all of our presenters, and we will see you next time. Take care of yourselves.